And he is acclaimed and considered by tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of people in India to be the modern, perfect example of the selfless life and the power of the divine presence. His birthday is celebrated on National Youth Day and has been for 25 years. So the Indians represent Vivekananda as the strength of the Spirit. In other words, in the Spirit, you give up no strength, you actually reclaim your strength. You give up nothing by being a champion of the Spirit. He was the first person to ever stand up to the West at large and speak against the idea that at the core of our being is eternal sin. In 1893, in Chicago, not exactly a hotbed of Hindu activity. And nobody was ready for him when he showed up. He was a 30-year-old monk who spoke beautiful English, and they fell in love with him because there was very little of him left. The difference between you and I and the great saints of the world is just in degree, according to Vedanta. The saints have done greater work at cleaning away the dirt that hides the light. And in your practice, you have less dirt hiding your light than you did a year ago. And you'll have less dirt a year from now, because that's what it's all about. Spiritual growth is not additive. You cannot become more spirit. You are the infinite spirit. Spiritual growth really is subtractive. You think of the sun as the divinity within you, and our crazy notions, our little selfish notions of ourselves and life and others, those are the clouds around them. And those are what the saints have gotten rid of. And so Vivekananda came to the Parliament of Religions to teach America and the West at large this idea about what the truth is about what's at the core of our being, and it wasn't original sin. Would you like to hear what he had to say in 1893? Yes. And imagine this, once again, the 4,000 people in the room, the vast majority, if not all of them, were Christians from old school. So this was not something they had ever heard before. He started with children of immortal bliss, and that's a quote from the Upanishads. Children of immortal bliss, what a sweet name, what a hopeful name. Allow me to call you, sisters and brothers, by that sweet name, heirs of immortal bliss. Yea, the Hindu refuses to call you sinners. We are the children of God, the sharers of the immortal bliss, holy and perfect beings. Ye divinities on earth, sinners? It is a sin to call a man so. It is a standing libel on human nature. Come up, O lions, and shake off the delusion that you are sheep. You are souls immortal, spirits free. And this was the beginning of a revolution in America, where for the first time on the table, in America at large, of course Emerson was writing and teaching this stuff, but on the world stage for the first time, right next to Christianity and Judaism and Islam, was this idea of oneness on the world table now as an option. And it traveled the whole world. All around the world, messages from this gathering of a group of people at the first Parliament of Religions in world history. And what came out of it was this idea that so many people, when they heard about the idea of oneness, said, that sounds right to me. That sounds true. That sounds more true than I'm separate from everything. It feels right. And here is this man who is not speaking from something he read, but something I am sure he's experiencing, and I want some of that. And this is what has started the revolution, and I believe this is what keeps many of you coming back, is this idea, I want to experience this more often. Do I hear an amen? Yes. Amen. So, what are these principles? The Vedanta oneness wisdom is the oneness wisdom that most influenced, inspired, and accelerated the spiritual growth of the New Thought pioneers, from Emerson to Ernest Holmes. I have such great admiration for Ernest Holmes. He was right up front what his teachers were. He was right up front that he was a student for life and humble in his studentship, and that's what allowed him to be the great man that he was. Greatness comes from that gentle humility of not I, but thou. Not I, but thou. But there's two versions of that. There's the Western version of it, and there's the Eastern version of it. The Western version of it is God is here and creation is here, and there's a chasm in between. God said to Moses, you cannot know who I am. And so not I, but thou means not me, but something outside myself I have to give my power up to. The idea of Vedanta, not I, but thou, is the not I that I'm talking about is the ego that would be something of itself. The intellect that claims everything good, I did it, I, me, mine. And the thou that we bow before is the truth of our being. So we are not giving away any of our power, we're reclaiming our power. We are becoming a servant of the higher rather than a slave of the lower. Emerson said, all the mischief begins when the intellect would become something of itself. All reform aims, in one way or another, to obey the Spirit within, to listen to it. The Katha Upanishad has this great metaphor for life, the chariot. The chariot stands for the body. The passenger is the lord of the chariot, what the Hindus call the Atman, the divinity within. The intellect is the driver. The reins are the mind, and the horses are the senses. And the destinations are where the horses take us, where our senses take us. And not just senses in a Western way, not just our food and appetite and sex senses. Our senses include our sense of anger, our sense of condemnation, our sense of self-pride, our sense of self-pity. And the intellect doesn't know that there's a passenger. So it's very difficult for the intellect to go anywhere else, so it's loose on the reins, and the horses are running the show. And then one day the intellect hears a voice and says, what's that? And that voice says, I am the Lord of the chariot. I am the owner of the chariot. I am you. And the intellect starts loving that voice so much. Eventually it starts saying, where would you like to go? And it starts slowly but surely learning how to pull the horses back so that it can take spirit where it wants to go. Meaning this, when we live in alignment with the will of the Spirit, we live a life of joy. This is moment to moment, because in one day we can go back and forth and back and forth. When we're living according to what the senses want, we are in some state of separation from truth. Separation, our selfishness, an Eastern definition of selfish is different than Western. Let me give you that. Self with a capital S means the spirit within, and self with a small s means any of the ego states that are based on a notion of separation from truth, which is what we live in most of the time. So selfishness is, in the Western sense, means stingy, and I'm not going to give you much, but selfishness in an Eastern sense means anything that reduces us to I, me, and mine, some type of taking or grabbing, of a grasping nature, of a needy nature, of I'm not getting my way, or I, me, and mine, which does not allow the Spirit to flow through us. No, as Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters. And the selfishness is what stands in the way. And the selfishness is what needs to be reduced. So here are the principles that come from Vedanta that have been adopted within New Thought. Number one, first and foremost, from the Upanishads, the oneness of existence. The truth is all is one. The second revelation for the first time in world history is the divinity of the soul. At the core of the soul is the divinity. Now, Ernest Holmes, when he wrote his last masterpiece, The Voice Celestial, it was an homage in its form to the Bhagavad Gita. And the subtitle is called Thou Art That, which is one of the great statements in the Upanishads. So it was undeniably an homage to his probably his favorite spiritual book, the Bhagavad Gita. And let me just read for you from Sacred Jewels this first idea of the divinity. This is DeLuca teaching his son the truth about who he is. And it goes like this. In the beginning was only being, one without a second, Out of himself he brought forth the cosmos and entered into everything in it. There is nothing that does not come from him. He is the truth. He is the self-supreme. And you are that, Sveitaketu. Thou art that. The truth that at the core of each one of our beings is the divinity. Not a drop of the divinity. The divinity. And that is who we are. Now, from that second revelation, it follows the first, which is everything is the divinity. Everything is one. Everything is this oneness. That means that you and I are this oneness. Then the third great revelation of the Upanishads is, what are we doing here? What's our purpose in life? And once again, from the Upanishads, a clear statement of what it is that we're doing here. Where there is unity, one without a second, that is the world of Brahman. Brahman is the Indian word for the infinite one. This is the supreme goal of life, the supreme treasure, the supreme joy. Those who do not seek this supreme joy live on but a fraction of this joy. The first half of my life, I was out to get what I wanted to get, and I got a lot. I was very good. I was motivated. And there was not a fraction of the joy I felt in the last half of my life knowing that it's all God and not having to have any kind of pressure about possessorship. The Gita says, get rid of your idea of possessorship. When they asked Gandhi, does this mean I have to give up my possessions? He said, no, you just have to give up the possessor. Know that all is God, or all is God's, depending on how you look at God. Make everything sacred and vow to live up to the highest. Now, the fourth major revelation is that there's two modes of knowing.